America is changing, and with it, its foreign policy too. For Europe, the alliance with the United States has always been crucial, but the recent years have been chaotic, with the impact of both President Trump and the subsequent changes under President Biden. These shifts have made it clear that the old way of doing things won't last very long. Meanwhile, amidst the chaos, Donald Trump's words about the war in Ukraine echo across the battlefields. In May, he made a bold statement that he wants to stop people dying in Russia and Ukraine. He even claimed that if re-elected as president, he could end the war in 24 hours. These statements raise serious concerns for European nations heavily reliant on the United States for security. And as the possibility of Donald Trump's return looms, the implications are significant, and people are left wondering what would happen if Trump were to regain power, and how would it affect the delicate balance of power in Europe? Stay tuned, as today we will uncover the answers. But before we move forward, we request you to subscribe to our channel for future videos. Let's say if Donald Trump returns to power as president, he could be even more determined and less restricted than before. This could be very bad for Ukraine and have disastrous consequences for Europe in different ways. One of the things he mentioned before was leaving NATO, which is a big deal because alliances rely on trust. If he suggests that he won't support his allies, it could completely destroy the European order that Russia is trying to undermine. Also, under President Joe Biden, America has been giving a lot of military aid to Ukraine and leading the way in the Western response. This shows how important American protection is. However, if Trump's populism takes over, we might see how quickly that protection can be lost. So, European governments are facing three major fears: the fear of an attack from Russia, the fear of economic harm from China, and the fear of being abandoned by America. But France has a clear answer to all three. They talk about something called European strategic autonomy. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, mentioned this idea in a speech. He asked a difficult question: will the American administration always be the same? He said that Europeans need to be able to defend themselves not just with military power, but also economically. Now, some people criticize Mr. Macron's idea of strategic autonomy because they think it's an attempt to separate Europe from America. But what if America decides to separate from Europe first? French officials believe that a transatlantic separation is already happening. They think America is becoming more focused on itself and its relationship with China. Mr. Trump's presidency was just a harsher version of this trend. Even Mr. Biden, the current president, has a protectionist stance. When there was an uproar in Europe about certain green subsidies, he told Mr. Macron that he didn't know they would harm European industries. The argument is that America's main concern is its competition with China. Sooner or later, even President Biden may want to reduce their involvement in Europe and focus more on Asia. If a crisis arises involving Taiwan, this shift could happen sooner. Now, the big question is, can Europe take care of itself if America abandons it? In theory, yes. European countries in NATO are well developed and have a population of nearly 600 million. They have almost 2 million people in their armed forces and years of experience working together. Now, there is a group called NATO, and America is the strongest member. It spends a lot of money on defense, even more than the other NATO countries combined. However, only 10 out of America's 30 allies will meet the target of spending 2% of their GDP on defense this year. Still, this should be enough to protect against Russia. European countries together spent $333 billion on defense in 2022, compared to about $86 billion spent by Russia. Even if we double or triple that amount to consider Europe's greater purchasing power, there is still a big gap. You see, Europe doesn't act as a united front. Its spending is among many small armies, air forces, and navies. Also, a lot of the money goes to support national industries. So the situation is a bit complicated. Europe has the potential to be strong and independent, but there are challenges to overcome and differences to bridge among the countries. And if America were to abandon Ukraine, Europeans would face a tough decision about continuing the war effort. Some diplomats believe they would choose to do so, but many are skeptical. Europe has smaller and more depleted arsenals compared to America. Its defense industry faces similar challenges, such as just-in-time production during peacetime and a lack of scale. Surprisingly, the war in Ukraine is making things even more difficult. Countries rush to buy ready-made equipment from America, South Korea, Israel and others, which worsens Europe's defense industry situation. And if Mr. Trump were to completely withdraw from NATO, Europeans would try to take over its functions instead of turning the EU into a military alliance. This insight comes from Camille Grand, a former Assistant Secretary General of NATO, who states that Europeans would need to fill the gaps left by America's presence in Europe. This includes around 85,000 American troops, headquarters staff, and 22 combat battalions. Additionally, Europe would need to acquire expensive enablers like air transport, refueling capabilities, space assets and intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities that America currently provides in abundance. Building all this up might take Europe about a decade, according to Mr. Grand's estimation. Now, let's talk about nuclear deterrence. Russia has around 6,000 nuclear warheads, while Britain and France have about 200 to 300 each. This means that without America, European powers will have to reconsider their stockpiles, strategies, and collaboration with remaining allies. In terms of economic independence, the EU has made notable progress. It's sometimes called open strategic autonomy to show that it remains open to the world. Europeans are gradually consolidating economic policy making within the EU. This has become even more important after facing various challenges, from vaccine shortages during the pandemic to Russia's invasion. Also, Europe has reduced reliance on Russian oil and gas, seeking alternative suppliers like America. So, in short, the election of Mr. Trump would be a catastrophe foretold, warns Kostan Stezenmiller from the Brookings Institution. European leaders struggle to find a good answer to this possibility. Some choose to ignore it, while others hope that Mr. Trump's impact will be less destructive than feared, possibly restrained by Congress and the Pentagon. There are even those who consider engaging with his more moderate supporters. One concern is whether Mr. Trump's election could bolster similar right-wing movements in Europe. Opinion polls show Alternative for Germany and the Social Democratic Party of Germany's Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. In France, worries grow about Marine Le Pen, the leader of the National Rally, potentially becoming president in 2027. Both parties have close ties to Russia and criticize Western support for Ukraine. While Mr. Biden demonstrated America's power ability to unite Europeans, Mr. Trump might reveal its power to divide them. People often say that NATO's purpose is to keep the Soviet Union out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. Also, strategic autonomy could serve a similar function. By developing more military capabilities, Europe can assume greater responsibility for its own security, as America focuses on Asia. It could also serve as a safeguard in case the strong alliance turns hostile. Furthermore, strategic autonomy could refute claims of European freeloading and demonstrate Europe's value to America. If done right, it might help keep Russia at bay, maintain American involvement, keep China at a distance, and ensure the unity of NATO. And now, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Do subscribe to the channel if you like our content. We will catch you in the next one.